A golden mask, a broken spine. The god king is dying. Tutankhamun, 18, trembles beneath the weight of sacred symbols. The crook and flail lie before him, but his fingers twitch uselessly. His spine bows. His left foot drags like a shadow behind him. Beside him stands Akhenaten, his sister, his wife, steadying his arm. Her face bears the same silent deformities. A jaw too long, eyes sunken, teeth protruding. Two children of the same blood, twisted by generations of sacred unions. The court bows in silence. Priests whisper of curses. Physicians speak of divine possession. But everyone knows the truth. The god blood has gone sour. For centuries, Egypt's pharaohs married within their line. Sisters, daughters, nieces. Believing divinity was a fragile flame that could not be shared. But in protecting it, they poisoned it. Tutankhamun is the result. A child born with clubfoot, scoliosis, seizures. Not cursed, but genetically doomed. A royal body turned into a battlefield of hidden mutations. They called him divine, but chromosomes do not respect crowns. This is not just the slow death of a boy. It is the collapse of a belief system. A theology unraveled by recessive genes and brittle bones. In a palace heavy with incense and dread, one truth lingers like smoke. What happens when the divine becomes defective? The pharaohs were not men. They were gods, walking the earth in sandals of gold, their breath sacred, their blood divine. To ancient Egyptians, a pharaoh was the living Horus, a bridge between heaven and earth. His veins didn't carry mere blood. They carried the essence of order, the blueprint of the cosmos. To pollute that essence was to unravel creation itself, so they didn't. For centuries, Egypt's royal line folded inward. Brothers married sisters. Fathers took daughters. Nieces became queens. Not out of desire, but obedience. The gods had set the precedent. Osiris married his sister Isis. Set married Nephthys. The world, they believed, had been born of divine incest. The pharaohs merely preserved that cosmic model. This was not lust, it was law. A foreign bride might bring silk or silver, but she could not bring purity. She did not carry god blood. And so the royal womb became a crucible, a sacred experiment repeating generation after generation, chasing immortality through isolation. But sacred blood is not immune to biology. Each generation narrowed the gene pool. What they hoped would preserve strength instead amplified weakness. Elongated skulls, missing teeth, scoliosis, seizures. Recessive mutations found each other in royal beds, and the line began to warp. Theology became genetics. The divine became defective. Inside the temples, priests chanted to keep the cosmic balance. But outside, people watched rulers who drooled, who limped, who died before their time. They heard rumors of stillbirths, of sons who never walked, of daughters who never spoke. The illusion of divine perfection began to crack, and a whisper grew beneath the chants and incense. Had the blood of the gods turned against them? The empire had bound its future to a bloodline, now that blood was fraying. By the time Amenhotep III took the throne in 1391 BC, sibling marriage was no longer a choice. It was law. Not a matter of desire, but of divine decree and political survival. The pharaoh's queen was not found in distant lands or rival houses. She was chosen from his own blood, sister, daughter, cousin. The bloodline had to remain pure, undiluted. The priests blessed these unions. The gods smiled down from their temples. The people bowed to this sacred order. Amenhotep III married his sister Setamun, binding blood to blood, faith to flesh. From their union came Akhenaten, a child born not just of flesh and bone, but of scripture and destiny. But purity demanded a price. As Akhenaten grew, his body betrayed the god's image. His limbs stretched unnaturally long, his skull curved like a fragile gourd. His hips flared, his chest softened, defying the traditional masculine form. Sculptors reshaped their art, not to capture the man, but to disguise his otherness. This new style was not mere fashion, it was camouflage. Akhenaten married Nefertiti, a cousin, perhaps a half-sister, and their children inherited the same genetic legacy. Soft bones, narrow jaws, wide, deep eyes. Among them was Tutankhaten, who would later be called Tutankhamun, the boy king who limped beneath the weight of history and heredity. What began as a sacred tradition had become a biological trap. The mighty 18th dynasty, at the height of power, was quietly unraveling from within, not by sword or famine, but by twisted bloodlines, inherited mutations coiling tighter with every generation. Yet the marriages continued, because to stop was to admit a terrifying truth. The divine bloodline was no longer a blessing. It was a slow, irreversible curse. He stood beneath the blazing sun, arms raised not to Amun, not to Osiris, but to Aten, the formless disk of light, a god without face or shape. Akhenaten was unlike any king before him. His body betrayed secrets the throne dared not speak aloud. His skull swelled and stretched, curved like a fragile gourd. His eyes were wide set, chin soft, almost feminine. His spine curved in painful arcs. Limbs dangled too long, too thin, as if gravity was a stranger and pain stitched into every faltering step. The court artists, torn between truth and devotion, abandoned tradition. The rigid, perfect forms of past pharaohs melted into fluid distortion. Akhenaten was drawn with breasts, wide hips, elongated fingers, art reflecting not ideal, but reality. His body was no longer hidden behind myth. It was the myth. Whispers spread through temple and town. His difference became divine proof. This was no curse. He was chosen. The sun god had forged a new image of divinity, fragile, imperfect, human. With this body came a radical faith. Akhenaten stripped power from old priesthoods, shuttered temples of Amun, and built Akhenaten, a city devoted solely to Aten. Monotheism replaced centuries of polytheism, one god, one ruler, one vision. But the people did not all bow. Beneath Aten's harsh light, famine crept. Isolation deepened. Rumors spread of a king lost in the heavens, blind to the suffering below. Graffiti on village walls mocked him. He walks like a woman. He speaks like a child. The god king was becoming a pariah. The golden mask began to crack, melting away to reveal a fragile, failing man. A ruler desperate to rewrite the gods before his own body unraveled completely. Akhenaten's reign was a prophecy written in flesh, a testament to the cost of divine blood turned against itself. Crowned at 9, Tutankhamun was a child wrapped in gold, lifted above men as a living god. But he was no god. He was a fragile vessel, the product of generations of sacred blood turned toxic. Modern DNA would reveal what the priests could not say aloud. His mother and father were full siblings. The blood in his veins was pure and broken. His body told the story. A cleft palate split the roof of his mouth. His spine twisted like a serpent coiling in pain. His left foot was so deformed he could barely stand, let alone walk. More than 130 canes were found in his tomb, not as symbols of power, but tools of survival. Inside his skull, fluid pressed against his brain. Hydrocephalus. Pain was his constant companion. Seizures clouded his mind. Movements were stunted, erratic. The golden throne beneath him weighed less than the burden he carried in his bones. But pain was not what killed him. The embalmers worked hastily. His chest was caved in, ribs shattered. Chemical burns marked his body, the careless scars of rushed mummification. CT scans revealed a blow to the back of the head. His leg was broken days before death. Was it an accident, a fall from a chariot he could barely mount, or was it murder? A king too weak to rule, a court too hungry to wait. Power wore a polite face, but behind Thebes' curtains, knives moved faster than prayers. Poison, politics, a wound too perfectly placed. He died at 18, entombed in splendor, wrapped in myth. But his bones whispered the truth. Divine blood is not a blessing. It is a curse carved in flesh. Beneath the gleam of golden masks and towering obelisks, another Egypt quietly breathed. Hidden in shadow, methodical, fragile, it was the Egypt of healers, of scribes bent low over papyrus scrolls, of bones dissected in secret chambers. The priests called it divine punishment, possession, tests from the gods. But the physicians saw patterns. They recorded cleft palates passed from father to son, club feet that returned with each generation, seizures that struck royal children in the same violent rhythm. They did not know the word genetic, but they understood inheritance, not as prophecy, but as careful observation. In the archives of Thebes, the Edwin Smith papyrus whispered its secrets: surgical techniques to treat cranial fractures, diagnoses of spinal deformities, detailed notes on neurological conditions, remedies blended from honey, myrrh, and opium, splints crafted from papyrus and wood, even crude attempts at correcting cleft lips, ancient surgeries performed not for vanity, but survival. In their own tongue, they spoke of the Necheru Setkem, the curse of sacred blood. They could not question the divine law, but their ink dared to speak otherwise. They watched pharaohs wither in their prime, infants die before their names were spoken, and still, the priests demanded purity, more sacred unions, more blood folded inward, tighter and tighter. The physicians walked a perilous line, servants of science in a kingdom ruled by myth. They could not openly challenge the divine story, but they rewrote the margins. In coded language, in whispered consultations, they built a secret history, one where divinity was not the cause of suffering, but the mask concealing it. They treated kings like fragile vessels, patching cracks while pretending not to see the fractures widening beneath the surface. On their shelves lay scrolls filled with silent warnings, warnings that would go unread, until centuries later, when bones were exhumed and the truth bled out beneath the cold light of forensic science. When Alexander the Great died, his vast empire fractured, but in Egypt, one fragment found new life. Ptolemy I, a Macedonian general, did not simply inherit a kingdom. He inherited a myth older than stone temples and shifting sands. To rule Egypt, Ptolemy could not wear just a crown. He had to wear the bloodline, but his blood was Greek, foreign to the sacred Nile, so he rewrote the story. The Ptolemies claimed descent not from Egyptian gods, but from Dionysus and Apollo, divine siblings of Greek legend. Then they married their own sisters, making the lie holy through ritual. They called it Theos Adelphos, God's sibling. Priests chanted in Egyptian, statues of Osiris and Isis looked on. It was propaganda draped in divinity. The Egyptian people saw continuity. The Greeks saw consolidation. The crown would stay locked in a single family. No rivals, no dilution. But the price was the same. Where the 18th dynasty stumbled into collapse, the Ptolemies engineered theirs with cold, calculated precision. Ptolemy II set the precedent, divorcing his foreign wife, marrying his full sister Arsinoe II in a ceremony thick with incense and borrowed holiness. By Cleopatra II's time, the family tree no longer branched. It coiled tighter and tighter. She married her brother, then her nephew, then her daughter's son. These were not marriages of love or lust. They were calculus. Each generation tightened the spiral of inherited weakness. Greek rationalism fused with Egyptian theology. Sacred blood became bureaucratic bloodline control. What began as divine order became surgical design. To the public, they showed gods, gold-leafed processions, twin thrones of husband and wife-sister. But behind palace doors, the blood thickened, repeated, sickened, and it was irreversible. A normal family tree branches, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. Each fork a new path, a chance for renewal. But the Ptolemies did not branch. They spiraled. By the time Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was born, her bloodline had looped back on itself so many times that across 5 generations, she had only 6 distinct ancestors. Not 32, as nature intended. 6. They traded complexity for control. A dynasty engineered for power, but condemned by genetics. The results were written on their bodies. The palace became a gallery of grotesques. Ptolemy IV grew so monstrously obese, his throne cracked beneath him. Ptolemy VI suffered seizures and erratic moods, his reign interrupted by catatonia. Hemophilia, the silent killer, spread through royal veins, turning every bruise into a threat of death. Eyes wandered, hands trembled, madness bloomed beneath the gold. They were not blind, records survive, papyrus scrolls filled with symptoms, treatments, and measurements. They saw the spiral tightening. Cleopatra VII was both exception and inevitability. Born of brother and sister, she carried the weight of centuries of genetic compression. Roman writers mocked her masculine features, her deep voice, her prominent teeth, signs of inbreeding etched into empire gossip. Yet she moved empires, spoke 9 languages, outwitted generals, seducted the world's most powerful men. She was the end of the spiral, brilliant, broken, and alone. Her children did not survive to rule. One, Caesarion, inherited too much blood and none of her cunning. The others faded into Rome's shadow, forgotten footnotes of a line that devoured itself in the name of divine continuity. It was never a tree. It was a helix collapsing inward, a dynasty folded in on itself until all that remained was gold, silence, and ash. In polished stone and painted fresco, they stand eternal, upright, serene, chiseled into perfection. Gods among men. But stone cannot tremble, paint cannot bleed. The truth was far darker. Behind gilded death masks and alabaster statues, bodies were riddled with disease. Obese torsos hidden beneath embroidered robes, faces stretched and distorted by deformity, limbs buckling under their own weight, and still the artists carved lies. Ptolemaic sculptors were not mere craftsmen, they were propagandists, painting a fantasy with every brushstroke. Each statue of a young king showed perfect balance and symmetry, even as the real man sweated through silk and leaned heavily on canes. A dynasty collapsing inward, held upright only by illusion. The Greeks whispered it first. Roman writers shouted it loudest. Polybius called the later Ptolemaic court a parade of monstrous figures. Plutarch described Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, as bloated and drunken, his mouth trembling with half-sung hymns to gods he no longer believed in. Even divinity began to look away. But Egypt was not alone. When Rome swallowed Egypt, it inherited these warnings and ignored them. Caligula, born of the Julio-Claudian line, stared into the same cracked mirror. He claimed divine blood, worshipped himself in public temples, slept with his sisters. His spiral echoed the ancients, paranoia, seizures, sadism draped as ceremony. He made his horse a consul, declared war on the sea. Like the last Ptolemies, he wrapped madness in silk and demanded worship. The gods never bled, but men pretending to be gods, they bled. Often, messily. What survives now is not divinity, but decay. A reminder carved not in granite, but in bone. Behind every divine face, a very human horror. By the time Cleopatra ascended the throne, the blood of the gods had curdled into something fragile, a thread stretched to snapping. Her family, bred and rebred for purity, was a lineage fraying at the edges, but Cleopatra understood what her ancestors did not. When blood fails, influence must speak louder. She turned to Rome. Julius Caesar was no mere lover. He was a lifeline. Her son by him, Caesarion, was her bid for survival beyond the spiral. Yet the child was fragile from the start, pale and thin-limbed, prone to fevers. Roman visitors whispered he spoke softly and walked with difficulty. Too much divine blood, too little dilution. Then came Mark Antony, another alliance cloaked in silk and power. Together they conceived 3 children. But the pattern repeated. Weakness, early illness, brittle inheritance shaped by centuries of self-worship and inbreeding. Cleopatra wrapped her children in gold and incense. Roman poets wrapped her in legend. But beneath the splendor lay desperation. a queen gambling on the last fragile threads of her broken lineage. At Actium in 31 BC, the illusion shattered. Her fleet fled. Her fate was sealed. She refused to become a trophy paraded through Roman streets. A failed deity stripped of divinity. She chose poison, or the asp, or perhaps both. Historians disagree. What mattered was this: she died on her own terms, draped in silk, spine straight, eyes wide. The divine bloodline ended with her. Caesarion was executed by Octavian soon after. Her other children vanished into history, too weak to claim the empire she fought for. The gods, it seemed, no longer protected their own. What began as sacred marriage had twisted into a centuries-long suicide pact. A final generation born not of love or lust, but theology turned deadly inheritance. With Cleopatra's death, the last god-king crumbled to dust. When Octavian entered Alexandria in triumph, he did more than conquer a kingdom. He inherited its mistakes. The golden statues, the silken tombs, the vast libraries thick with dust and secrets, all artifacts of a bloodline that had collapsed under its own perfection. He studied them carefully. Augustus, as he became known, saw what centuries of divine incest had wrought upon Egypt. 1,000 years of worship had produced not gods, but ghosts, sickly children, mad kings, dynasties consumed by their own reflection. He would not repeat the error. Rome's emperors would reject reliance on blood alone. They would choose heirs, not from family, but from competence. Adoption replaced heredity. The empire would be ruled by capable successors, not deformed sons, a clear break from sacred blood to pragmatic power. Yet Rome remained curious. Emperor Claudius, frail and underestimated, obsessed over the fall of dynasties. He commissioned a study, led by historian Manetho the Younger, to catalog Egypt's genetic horrors. Surviving fragments read more like autopsy reports than royal chronicles. Misshapen skulls, broken hips, childhood deaths, inherited madness. A case study in inherited collapse. The scrolls were hidden away, some burned, others locked in archives, not because they were false, but because they were too true. What had been divine mystery was now medical tragedy. Rome learned its lesson, not with reverence, but with caution. Though still haunted by whispers of incest and instability, the Julio-Claudian dynasty measured legacy not in blood, but survival. Egypt became a warning, carved not in hieroglyphs, but in collapsed thrones and broken bones. The gods had failed, but their mistakes would be studied. The tombs lie silent now. The scent of frankincense long faded into dust. But inside the bones of ancient kings, a truth still hums. A final warning, encoded in blood and bone. For centuries, priests told a sacred story that pharaohs were gods, their blood untouchable, their bodies divine. But DNA does not bow to theology. Modern science peeled back the golden masks. Geneticists pried open royal coffins and found not eternal perfection, but fragile humanity. Tutankhamun's malformed foot, Akhenaten's elongated skull, the collapsed rib cage, clubbed limbs, cleft palates, and hidden pregnancies that ended too soon. A royal family drowning in its own bloodline. It was more than a medical mystery. It was a spiritual reckoning. Egypt's divine kingship did not fall to swords or famine, but to biology. The gods promised immortality, but delivered hydrocephalus, epilepsy, scoliosis, infertility. Each generation born weaker than the last. Temples stood empty, gods forgotten, yet something survived. Court physicians, trapped between myth and reality, began to document. Their papyrus scrolls were not prayers, but early blueprints of genetics, inheritance, and embryonic medicine. They noticed patterns, recognized recurrence. They did not know the word recessive, but they knew the signs. When Rome burned their temples, these scrolls were copied, preserved. The legacy of divine incest did not vanish. It evolved. It became knowledge, a foundation for future science, a cautionary tale etched into human history and human cells. The ancient Egyptians sought purity. What they created was a slow-motion catastrophe spanning over 1,000 years. Beneath the gold and myth, the real inheritance remained. Not crowns, not thrones, but a lesson. Even those who call themselves gods must obey the laws of biology or pay the price. In every generation that follows,